Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, it's another list video. And this is the October Patreon request from my good buddy John. And it's going to be a little later than I intended, because a couple of other things came up, so I wasn't able to sit down and record this for it to go live on Halloween, but the day after Halloween, Len, forgive me, John, stuff. It, of course, is my top 10 horror movies. Now, one cheat on this list aside, I got 10 for you. Now, I'll preface this by saying this list does fluctuate a lot when I present it, like what would I say my 10 are. And thinking about it and going through the decades, some of which I haven't really watched a lot of horror films, and the ones I have, I don't think I could put on this list. These are the ones that came to mind when I was thinking of it. And some people are going to go, well, this list is a little derivative in points, but hey, it's what I'm saying are mine. Before I get too far into it, just a reminder, if you do want to support the channel, the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. With the Patreon, you'll gain access to videos early, and you'll be able to request videos like this. And if you just want to do one-off support or one-off request, go the PayPal route. Either way, it will be appreciated. So, top 10. Now, I just have them on my list right now. I don't really have the directors or the writers or anything set up. I'm just going to go off my memory for it. But, just so you know, some of these ones I already do have in-depth reviews talking about the film on the channel. Other ones, down the road, I'll be putting up other videos for. And a couple of these I'll probably be talking about their DVD and Blu-ray releases. Some of which I haven't gone through. Other ones, when they come down the pipe, will probably be video essay ones. Those of you who know my history of film and what movies I like will probably know which will be which. But if not, I'll make a little note of it. And before we go, here we go. Now this first one is going to be the cheat one, so I'm going to get it out of the way, pulling off a band-aid. We're going to start. Number 10. It is the James Whale Frankenstein duology. Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein, both with Boris Karloff and Colin Clive in there. Now, the reason that I put these two films together is because they're so linked, because, same director, same stars, same creative force, and the fact that they both borrow elements from Mary Shelley's original novel and tell a mostly complete story. I mean, you can look at the original Frankenstein in a vacuum and say it's a complete story because of how it ends. But with this film in existence, it really does go like that. Now, there's also the later films, Son, Ghost, and all that. But Son is more a very, very loose sequel to these two films. And then after that, there's loose continuity amongst all the Universal films. So, it's like they exist there, but they're kind of like in a soft vacuum to where there's like loose continuity. Whereas here, I mean, there is some loosey bits in place, but part of it is probably genuine errors. Other parts, it's the whole thing of fans back then not caring as much about continuity as they do now. And part of it is they'll be like, oh, well, maybe they won't notice. Because the only time you could watch these films was in the theater. As James Rolfe himself even said, if you missed a movie in theaters, you missed it. I think the only other option would be if you rented a copy of it from the studios themselves. But I don't know if that was prevalent at this early in the age of cinema, or if that didn't come into existence later. And of course, owning your own personal copies, but I don't know how many people did that. I know it was like a decade or so later. I know Joseph Stalin owned some westerns, but that's a decade later, probably a little bit more prevalent then. The first Frankenstein film followed in the wake of Bela Lugosi's Dracula film, which, as many of you know, I do enjoy parts of it, but I don't really hold that film as in high regard from an enjoyment standpoint. But for its place in history, I do give it props, but it's not a film I could see myself watching a lot, aside some specific scenes. Now, the Spanish version, which I reviewed a couple years ago, that deserves all the praise it gets, and more for its technical achievements at the time. But this Frankenstein film, it definitely took the formula that the Dracula film started. It improved on it. And it doesn't hurt matters. You got James Whale behind the camera. Excellent. Good cast. And just the way that it introduces the monster, Pierce's makeup effects on the monster, the way that Boris Karloff moves in it, that look in his eye. And even though it does take away the monster's voice from the novel, enough of the stuff is there that remains from Karloff's performance that you get everything across. And of course, this is where we get a lot of the Frankenstein cliches beginning. You know, wakened by lightning, it's alive, it's alive! You know, bolts in the neck, and more some of the way the monster talks. That's going to be the second film. And a lot of iconic scenes in here, you know, like it's alive, like I just mentioned. Of course, the one-time censored scene of throwing the flowers with the girl, which goes with the whole thing of the monster not realizing the whole thing of good and evil, even though it has a criminal brain. That's one of the things I like about it, too, is that it throws in there, and it's like, the brain is from a criminal, and it's a developed brain, but since the monster is a newborn, how much of his actions till the end, where it's, you could say it's kind of revenge for everything that's happened to him in the film, is the brain belonging to a criminal, and how much of it is the accidental actions of what is essentially a giant newborn toddler-like being. Toddler in the body of a man, as it were, that is being rejected by its father. It goes there. I'm trying not to divulge too much into it. I'm just doing light talking here because this is not a review. It's a list. But all that makes the film excellent. And then you go into The Bride of Frankenstein, where it continues that point. The monster develops further, and he actually gets his voice. And the makeup effects with Pierce continue wonderfully. I mean, the monster looks like he went through all the crap that he went through in the first film. You know, this is where more of the cliches go. You know, friend, good. That way that Karloff makes him talk. And continues more of it, gets some more mad scientist cliches. And then, of course, the bride, even though she's only on screen for a few minutes at the very end, she became iconic in and of herself. That hairdo and the hissing, which the actress based on the swans in one of the LA parks. And, of course, the ending is sad and all that. It's a bittersweet one because the doctor and his wife live, but the monster and everyone else dies. Which is the way that is. Go, you live, you stay. And then, of course, the iconic line, we belong dead. Yeah, there's not really much else to say about it without being a full review. It's like, I know it's a cheat, but since these two are well connected together, I had to include them on the list together. And goes without saying, these two films get my seal of approval. And if you're trying to get into the classic Universal monster films, you don't know where to start, I'd say start with these two at first and then work your way outwards. And the next one is going to be a film those of you who have been watching me for years know I do enjoy. Enjoyed it since childhood. It, of course, is the remake of The Blob. Now, I got to give a little bit of props to the classic Steve McQueen film, because without that we wouldn't have this one. But I don't really enjoy the McQueen one as much. I mean, I do enjoy it, and when you watch that film, you can definitely see where the directors and writers of 80s horror were influenced, and you can see where they were paying loving tribute to that type of film and its construction in films such as Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which, if I had to have a honorable mentions, that film would be on there. But I just don't really enjoy that film as much as I enjoy this one. And like any good remake, regardless of genre, Blob 88 is a textbook example of it. Is you take the core aspect of the film, its general plot, you update it a little bit, whether you're going to do it in a contemporary setting or actually do a period piece, doesn't matter either way there, but you take that core aspect of it and you make the specific plot elements different. It's the same general story, but the plot elements are different, so it doesn't feel like a note-for-note copy. You're not Psycho 98ing the film, as it were. And that's what this film does. It takes that same nugget, that meteorite falls from outer space, this gelatin blob creature comes out of it. It starts small, and every time it devours a living being, it grows and grows and grows until they have a giant mess, a gelatinous mess that is going through town and eating people. And of course, you got the 80s special effects, so you know it's going to be visceral and gooey and all that. And of course, you added to it the one moment in the film where this film has the balls to actually kill off a kid in the sewers. That's when you know what type of film you're watching. Because 50s horror, they wouldn't kill off a kid like that. Kill off an old man, kill off a pet, yeah. But killing off a kid, no, we can't have that. I mean, even some 80s horror films, you don't kill off a kid. Nightmare on Elm Street, they're teens, so we don't actually see the kids die. They just talk about it. Friday the 13th, the closest we get to that is when Tommy Jarvis gets attacked in part 4. Hold on to that. I'll talk about that in a bit. But actually killing off a kid. And of course, the main character, instead of being, you know, the clean jock type character like you would expect Steve McQueen to play in the original, here they have a character like that they introduced early on, but then there's a swerve, bro. He gets eaten, and the lead character's loner type character, like James Dean type character from Rebel Without a Cause. I mean, you get that good moment with the motorcycle. And he ends up with the girl at the end. It's very subtle, but there's enough implication there, like, oh yeah, they're going to be together. And then, of course, changing it to where instead of it being a full creature from outer space, it's a government experiment. Enough change there. It adds another little extra element to the plot at the very end. And then, of course, the little joke thing with the condoms. You gotta love that. That boy doesn't need condoms, he needs a muzzle. And then a little plot twist after that. Those of you who see the film know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of other elements that make this film excellent, but I'm just touching the surface with it. And if I don't have a review up, eventually I will. This is a film I did have the pleasure of seeing in theaters a couple years ago at the New Beverly Tarantino's Theater in 35mm film, and that was an experience. Full, packed crowd, all horror films of fans of various ages, and we all enjoyed it. It was an excellent film to see together. Next on the list, another film on this list I managed to see in theaters, and I saw it twice. The second time recently over in Redlands. It, of course, is the original John Carpenter's Halloween, written by him and Deborah Hill. And to add to this, the day I'm recording this, the day before, I actually went up to Pasadena and over into North Hollywood and actually visited some of the shooting locations. So I've actually been to some of them. They've changed a little bit because, you know, passage of time, you know, changing houses, changing trees and all that, but the overall area looks mostly the same. It's nice seeing it. Like, okay, that's what that was. There's the Myers house and all that. Of course, Halloween 78. This is considered to be the first true slasher film. Now, there have been films before this that had the elements. Like I've talked about in here before, you could consider the Mummy films with Karras the first slasher-esque films because they have a lot of the stereotypes, you know, slow-moving killer, body count, masked, indestructible. Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw Massacre started a little bit more of the step towards a true slasher film, more so Texas, I think, because that one has a body count, but it's not too big. Mask on the killer. And then, of course, Psycho. That one is also considered to be the early elements, but I'd say that's like a proto-slasher film. You got some of the elements there, but not all of them as you would see in a true slasher film, but it is what you could say is the grandfather. But here is where we start to get the true slasher film in vogue and leads into the 80s, and that's the period of the slasher film. You got so many different ones with so many different iconic masks. I mean, without Michael Myers, there probably would be no Jason. Well, there'd definitely be no Jason. And there'd probably be no Freddy and some of the other ones. And there's not really much I could say in this short one without spoiling a lot, but it's a good, excellent slasher film made on a small budget. While it's not bloodless, there's hardly any blood, so it shows you can create that sense of horror just with tension, little blood, and theater of the mind. Because in certain times, what you can imagine in your head is creepier than what you actually see. Now, other times, what you see is going to be like, eh. But sometimes, what you don't see is scarier. And just the way the film was shot on the shoestring budget for the time just shows that even with less money-wise, you can do a lot. Next film, we go from Michael, we go into Jason. This is the one entry of Jason's that's going to be on this list. And of course, it's one of those instances, if you're going to put a Friday the 13th film on the list, you got to pick a good one. So I'm picking probably, it usually goes back and forth with 4 on whether this is my favorite or not, but right now this is the one picking it up. It, of course, is Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. This is the one that usually balances everything great about this series. I mean, you have the self-aware humor in there. I mean, the film's credits open with a parody of the James Bond gun sequence. With that alone, you know what type of film you're getting. I mean, you got a lot of classic editing and lines that go back and forth, and it's like, oh yeah. And of course, Jason, this is the beginning of zombie Jason. In the previous films with Jason, he's zombie-esque, but it's like he's human Jason. And despite what some people say, he actually does run as human Jason. I mean, he does survive a lot of stuff, but he actually, has to recover a bit to take the damage, depending on what it is. Here, most of the stuff, I mean, he'll react to it, but then he'll get back up. He just keeps coming. This is where he really becomes an indestructible killer, and he has superhuman strength. I mean, in this film, he bends one character backwards, literally breaking their back. That shows what type of strength he has. And of course, the zombie thing, and he's brought back to life, old school Universal style, big metal rod, bolt of lightning. And of course, this is the final film where he does battle with Tommy Jarvis, his long-term rival, who of course is played by Thomas Matthews of Return of the Living Dead fame. You mean the movie lied? Well, apparently, the Frankenstein films didn't lie. All you need is a bolt of lightning. I think, can you blame Tommy with the stuff he'd gone through in the previous two films? The end of the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, as it were. Excellent kills, good use of music, Teenage Frankenstein! And of course, this is the film that He's Back, the man behind the mask was written for. Which, of course, I could go with any Friday the 13th film, but this is the one it was written for. He's back! He's the man behind the mask. If you've never heard that song, you need to listen to it. It's an excellent metal song, and it's an excellent song for this film to end on. And of course, there's other things like there being deleted scenes that were never shot for this film. But if there's any shot within the actual film that kind of sums up what type of film you're getting with this, it's when the gravedigger caretaker is burying the body. He's like, why'd they have to go and dig up Jason? Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment. Right into the camera. Right there is where you know. And then the shot of the credit card. The dark humor there is how you know what type of film you're getting. And it definitely comes with my recommendation. If you're going to show your friend any Jason film to show them what this series can be at its zenith, this would be it. Now, whether they like the other films, that's going to be up to their individual taste. But this is one that you definitely should show them. Next on the list, it would not be a horror movie list without a zombie film on here. But which one? I mean, I wasn't really a big fan of White Zombie when I saw it. And a lot of the other ones are usually from the Romero ones. I haven't seen Serpent in the Rainbow yet, so that's not on here, if that's what you're thinking it's going to be. It, of course, is going to be the original Dawn of the Dead, the 70s one. That one I've always enjoyed. I mean, I enjoy the original Romero ones. I haven't seen Land of the Dead or the ones after that yet, so can't comment on them. I've always enjoyed the Romero trilogy, but of the three, I mean, Day has a lot of iconic moments too. Night of the Living Dead is the original. Without that, we wouldn't have the slow-moving, flesh-eating zombies, so we got to give a little bit of praise to that. But if I had to pick any of the ones to put on the list, it'd have to be Dawn of the Dead. I mean, Tom Savini's effects, I mean, him as a biker near the end, Ken Foray in there. If there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. The comic book-esque makeup effects for the zombies, it really does work. A little bit of running zombies when it comes to the kids. And then, of course, classic lines. We got this, man. We got this by the ass. And then the mall setting. Which, there's a lot said about the subtext you can throw there. It all goes together to make an excellent film. Now, there's multiple cuts, multiple running times. And I don't know what the running time on mine is. Mine is like the 2 VHS copy one, and I'm looking right at it. I don't know which one it is, but it's a good one. That's the one I usually watch. Next on the list, this is an example of where you take a film and a premise that could and should be B-movie fodder. You get the right creative team in there, especially the right person in the director's chair with the right vision, the right eye for detail, and of course, good storyboards to get the budget increased. And you turn it from a B-movie into an A-movie. Now, the plot is still one you would find in a B-movie. It's just executed in a way that turns it into an A-movie. Those of you who know your sci-fi horror history already know what film I'm talking about. That, of course, is Ridley Scott's Alien. Now, this was not the first entry in this film series I saw. That, honor or dishonor, depending how you looked at things, goes to Alien 3. Which is why I still do have a little bit of a soft spot for Alien 3. I mean, I'm not really going to go into all that, but I do, when I watch it, I usually watch the assembly cut. And with all the stuff behind the scenes, it's a miracle that film is even watchable in the shape it is in, even though I do understand why a handful of my buddies hate that film with the passion of a burning sun. Me, I can't. Aliens has horror elements, but it's more sci-fi action. There's like just a couple moments of horror because it continues the same story, so we got to keep some of those in there for a few scenes. But it's not a true horror film. Alien and Alien 3 are the only ones that really go into that, but Alien 3 is like its own little thing, whereas Alien, it harkens back to the old dark house type of film where characters go to a place they shouldn't go. They go in, and crap happens. It just happens to be set in space. And a lot of the stuff is considered revolutionary for the time. I mean, it led to a lot of imitators, a lot of different alien creatures that look like xenomorphs, a lot of ones that would go on, yeah. And because of that, it does kind of lead to the whole subtext about male rape and all that, and it's intentionally there to make you uncomfortable. And of course, the chest burster scene is iconic, the alien look iconic, and the way you rarely ever see it. That's intentional from Ridley to try to avoid the old man in a suit thing, which, of course, now with CGI, with the last couple ones he made, he didn't do that, but for that one, he wanted to avoid that because of the special effects at the time, and it works, because the only time you really see the xenomorph, and more than just brief flashes, and at the end, and by that point, because of the lighting and all that, and even with how it's edited, you never see it fully clearly. You just see it in parts. So it still is very, very effective, and they got the right actor to be in the suit, too tall and very, very lanky, to where even though you know it's a man in a suit from a out-of-universe perspective, in-universe, it definitely still feels alien-esque. And of course, the whole truck drivers in space. There's so much stuff I could say about this film, but you know, not trying to do it as a review, just give a little bit of insight about what makes the film great, as I've mentioned with a couple of the other films this far into it. There's the characters you care about, the premise, the world seems lived in, which I'm not going to get into the whole Prometheus thing, because that's a whole other thing, but it feels lived in at this point. Like I just said, the truck drivers in space vibe, you care about the characters, and when they die, you do feel bad. Ridley Scott, the way he has all the shots framed, the way the world looks, all the sets, the visual effects, costumes, the makeup, everything adds together to make an excellent film. And in addition to the old dark house thing, you could say that the xenomorph is kind of another one of those slasher ones, following, kind of going side to side with Halloween. The only difference is it's more akin to like the Mummy, to where instead of like an actual killer, it's like a force of nature. The difference is the Mummy is a force of nature that came from a human, whereas this, I guess you could say kind of the same thing because of how the xenomorphs are born, but it's more like an unknown. So it kind of goes into that Lovecraftian thing of our fear of the unknown. Next on the list, of course, if I had a Frankenstein film, I had to have a Dracula film on here. And of course, even though I haven't seen a lot of the other ones, I haven't seen a lot of the Hammer ones, I haven't seen some of the other ones, I haven't seen the Langella one. But one that I've always had a soft spot for and enjoyed is Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola film. Another film on here that I've actually had the pleasure of seeing in theaters a couple years ago. You want to know my thoughts on seeing it in theaters? I do have a theater experience video up on the channel. Hashtag shameless plug. This one I've always just enjoyed because of how theatrical it is, and you know, going with Coppola's eye for detail and how he directs his films. And the cast, I mean, some might say there's a little bit of overacting at points, but that kind of is the point. It goes with the whole tone of what the film is setting. And it does borrow a lot of stuff from the novel, and it's one of the few film adaptations to include the Texas character of Quincy Morris. Which, that's always a plus, is like you never really see that many Dracula films of Quincy Morris, because he always gets the shaft. You always see Stewart. You always see Dr. Stewart, even though a lot of times he's re-put as a father of one of the girls instead of a suitor. And of course, you always have Jonathan there. Depending on the film, his plot elements are either given to Renfield, or like here, they follow it note for note. Which I'll say, and I've said in every video I mentioned, that Keanu Reeves is definitely miscast as Jonathan Harker, but of course it adds for perfect meme material. My God, the man! He's grown young! It definitely was miscast. But that's special effects, the costume design. I know people make fun of the way Dracula looks in the Transylvania scenes, but I don't mind it because it definitely makes you start thinking that there's not all is right with the Count, which is supposed to be the point of that part of the plot. Especially if you've read the book, you notice that Jonathan, as he's there, he slowly starts to notice not all is right. And if you go with the Count dressed in a way that could be considered anachronistic, it fits. And I've heard like the style he's in is definitely anachronistic for the time period the film is supposed to take place in. And if you are a fan of the film, I do highly recommend you pick up the special edition DVD or Blu-ray. I happen to have the DVD version, and watch the behind-the-scenes film stuff on the film. I know there's the phrase they don't make films like this anymore, but for Bram Stoker's Dracula, it is the case because a lot of the special effects you see are done in camera, and the way that they show everything was done is like you have to applaud them for going the extra step. Some of them you can kind of understand, like the shadows on the wall is pretty easy how they figured that out. But doing everything else, it's like, oh, that's amazing. They really should take the time to do stuff like this more. Especially since this is done at a time period where they're slowly transitioning from a lot of the practical stuff to using more and more computers until now where basically everything's done on the computer. And they were told at one point how much it would cost to do all this stuff. And Coppola decided to just go with his son and all them, and they got this. I know some people say nepotism, but right nepotism because they did it all in camera and they did it well and it shows on the screen. Next film on the list is, of course, another one from the 90s, early 90s, and it's another monster film, which I probably should have prefaced this at the beginning, but when I'm talking about horror, I do include monster films, and I do include films that would be considered more thriller that do have horror-esque elements. Although it's not on the list, Silence of the Lambs would be an example of that. The Lambs would probably be on the list if I did a top 15, but top 10, nope. This, of course, is Tremors. Gotta love a good throwback monster film. Like Alien and the Blob. Another example of taking elements of films from the past, doing it in the future, and you having the right director, the right creative team behind it, and the right cast and knowing what type of film they're making. I know Kevin Bacon at one point said that, he thought at first this was going to be a low point of his career when he's making it. But he definitely has changed his mind since then. I mean, he tried to do that whole Tremors TV show pilot. But that's definitely, at the time he was making the film, you can kind of understand it. I mean, he had made Footloose before this. I mean, he started the 80s making the original Friday the 13th, and then he goes to Footloose and becomes kind of a big star in the 80s, and now he's doing a movie about giant worms out in the desert. It's one of those ones that, like, yeah. But he's still great in the film, cast in there. Of course, the late Burt Ward, got Michael Gross in there as the gun nut. Burt Gummer, he has some of the best lines in the movie. Broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you, you bastard? Got you moving, didn't it? And a lot of iconic scenes, like the scene I just mentioned where the graboid bursts into the rec room, them trying to get to the cat, flip forward, the pole vaulting scene. There's a lot of fun moments in this film. And of course the monsters learning as they adapt to the human strategy, and of course the beginning part where we don't see the monster right away. So that is what makes the first part of the film, is that the mystery of what exactly these creatures are. We know they're subterranean, but we don't know what they look like. We're trying to figure out exactly how they hunt, and that's what makes the early part of the film. There are deleted scenes for it, a couple of them. Let's add it, like I say with a lot of the Raymond ones, they are nice to see, but you can definitely see why they were deleted. And of course, this film spawned a franchise. We got Tremors 2, probably the best of the sequels. You got Tremors 3, low budget direct to DVD one, which is essentially just a glorified backdoor pilot for the TV show. The TV show, I got it over there. I actually do plan on reviewing the TV show one of these days, and I'll probably be doing it in the order that they were originally intended to be shown, and I'll be talking about them and the fact that why Michael Gross is not in a couple of the episodes. And then, of course, Tremors 4, the prequel, which I do enjoy. Of the later films, I've only seen the fifth one, which I think I did record a review that just got lost in the shuffle somewhere. But I remember liking it okay, but I'll have to rewatch it before I watch it again. It's just that the only negative thing I can say about it here is that, like, after waiting so many years for another one, or for another project to come, that's what we got. I mean, they're making them and all that, but it's like, I would have preferred, like, the other plan, which was the Thunder from Down Under, which would have reunited the big three from the first film, but it is what it is, and of course now, impossible due to Ward's passing. Now, the next one, out of the films on this list, this was the film I saw first, and this is the thing I'm going to preference in it when I actually do review it down the road. It's one of the films that I saw early on, left a great impression on me, and it's one of the reasons I love cinema. The other two, another film that would go into that category would be the original RoboCop, but this one, at least with monster films, definitely had that impression. And that, of course, is the one, the only, the original King Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. And I don't really want to say a whole lot about it because I want to save a lot of this for when I actually do review it, which, as I mentioned at the top, this one will be video essay style because I think that with how much I enjoy the film, I need to do it video essay style. It's just, you know, so much iconic about this thing. Kong himself, iconic universal monster. You know, 'twas beauty that killed the beast. The score, the special effects for the time. A lot of the scene where Kong pushes over the train, climbing the Empire State Building, getting shot down by the planes, falling, you know, fighting the T-Rex, you know, when they find the dinosaurs in the bog, you know, when he's pulling for the dress off. There's so many iconic moments about this film, and it all stemmed from one of the producers having the idea about the giant gorilla on the Empire State Building and then building the story backwards. Which shows you can do that effectively. You just got to know what you're doing right. Unlike a certain showrunner on a certain HBO show, which will remain nameless for this video. But it definitely comes with my mark, with my stamp of approval, and you definitely should watch the original. I do enjoy the 70s remake, but it did have its own impact on me, but nothing like the 33 one. And that one will also get its own video one of these days, especially since I got the Blu-ray over there I got to start watching. And as for the Peter Jackson remake, I really haven't watched that film in a long time. I mean, I haven't watched that film since the year it hit DVD, and I haven't watched the extended edition at all, so that one will definitely have to get one of its reviews one of these days. Last time I watched it was the last Easter I shared with my abuela in 06. And now, last but not least on this list, given a couple of the films I mentioned before in this video, this should not surprise you. This is another 80s one that I saw when I was a kid, and I've enjoyed it. Oh, by the way, I did see King Kong in theaters this year, by the way. Just saying that. And I did see this last film in theaters a couple years ago. I did do a theater experience video on it while I was driving home. So it might not be the best one. That's why I'm thinking of taking that, looking through the audio, and just typing down notes, and then just doing a proper video essay one on it. You know, food for thought. This, of course, is The Monster Squad. Perfect example of being a loving tribute and Monster Mash film. Now, they wouldn't really be able to do a version like this to equate to the 80s characters in an actual film. Fan films you'd be able to do it with. I mean, Blinky, Chris Nottarelli is an example of that, but you wouldn't be able to do it the same way. And I'm actually surprised they were able to do it here. Because think of all the monsters you got in this film. You got Dracula, you got the Frankenstein monster, you got a mummy, you got the Gill Man, and you have a werewolf that's supposed to be the Wolf Man. And all the designs are updated perfectly for the time period. I know around this time they were talking about doing a remake of the Creature from the Black Lagoon, but that fell through. And this is the closest we got to that. And that Gill Man design updated perfectly. The mummy, very lanky, very twitchy in its movements. Perfect for going with the Karis type mummy. And Dracula played sinisterly, wanting to take over the world for the creatures of darkness. Perfect. And of course, the werewolf you get the best of both type of world. When he's in the werewolf form, he's a creature of the night, terrifying, wanting to do his master's bidding, tear the throats out of anybody that crosses his path. But as a human, it's that tragic part where he hates being cursed, he wants to be locked up. Down to the point that when he actually does get killed, he actually thanks the person who shoots him with the silver bullet. So you get both of those dichotomies there. And then, of course, the Frankenstein monster. You get the classic portrayal where he's misunderstood and only wants friends. Which, of course, Dracula wants to use him for his own ends. But, of course, he makes friends, which leads to a little bittersweet moment at the end when the forces of evil are overcome and the monster goes with him. And, of course, Van Helsing, and they're good. And there's a little bit of that tongue-in-cheek humor that you see from the opening crawl where it's talking about Van Helsing and his minions going to go stop the forces of evil. They had one chance. Last line, they blew it. Hey! And then, of course, a gag that was borrowed from their previous film. 5,000-year-old dead guys do not get up and walk away by themselves. Cut to a scene of the mummy crossing the road. That type of one, you already know what you're getting. And then all the kid characters. I mean, you get a lot of this definitely with the kids falls into that vibe where it's like in the same slot as Stand By Me and the Goonies, where you got a group of friends where they all kind of are stock characters to a point. I mean, you even got the fat kid, you got the kid with the parents that are there. You got the troublemaker guy that's older that is there to be the cool kid. I mean, there's a lot of other different stock characters you can throw in there to flesh out the group, but it seemed like every one of them at least had the fat kid and the cool kid. And of course, my name is Horace. That's what the fat kid has to say about that. Of course, the little sister. And of course, one bit of dialogue that I really do love in this film is when they're talking about a horror movie franchise they watched called Groundhog's Day, which you can definitely tell with how many sequels they talk about is definitely a nice little wink and a nod to Friday the 13th. It's just, I just love the way they're talking about how in every film they kill the character and then how they keep having to make it more and more ridiculous. And then it's like they could blah, 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 blah. I forget the exact wording, but basically they just give this whole ridiculous spiel. It's like, and he'd still find a way to return from the grave. And that is what happens with a lot of these slasher films eventually, is that even though you enjoy the films, it just becomes more ridiculous and ridiculous, the ways they have to kill them, and then they keep coming back. I mean, some of the ways they kill them work. Like, I'm going to use Nightmare on Elm Street as an example. Part 1, and to a lesser extent, Part 7, take away his power. He has no more fear of you. That also goes with Part 2 a little bit. Part 3, bury and consecrate him. Part 4, make him see his own reflection and have his own evil tear himself apart. Part 5, you get a little ridiculous, like what we're you're gonna shrink him to the size of a baby and put him inside his mother's womb again? Okay, that's a little weird. Part 6, blow his ass up. Okay, that's kind of a little weak for Freddy's final death. At least in versus Jason, it was, bring him out and get rid of him in the short term. And there's a lot of, and even with Jason, I mean, a lot of his don't kind of make sense, even if a couple of them are a little ridiculous. Like, think about, let's see, Part 2, they hit him in the neck shoulder area with a machete. Good for human Jason. Hit him in the head with an axe. Good for human Jason. Slash the crap out of him with a machete, then he's dead. But Part 6, they don't really kill him, they just restrain him for a while at the bottom of a lake. And then he gets hit in the neck with a boat motor, so there's that too. Part 7, he's choked out by another undead person, which I guess works, but you think about it, you're like, huh? Part 8, hit by a rushing wave of toxic waste. So you see that the bit of dialogue does have a good amount of point. I mean, you even go with the Halloween films there, where some of them are good. I mean, you go from Part 4, where they unload on him with shotguns, where if this was going to be the definitive final one, and if it was in the budget, you could have had parts of Myers flying off. Like when one of the sheriffs blast, you see his arm with a knife flying, stuff like that, but not in the budget. He just falls back into the thing. And then Part 5, he just gets tranked and beat the crap out of by Dr. Loomis with a board. At least Part 6 had a better way at the end where they beat Myers, and the theatrical cut where they injected a bunch of what's supposed to be, I guess, acid or something else into him, and then they beat the crap out of him with a pipe. At least that's a little bit more satisfying, especially since it's not an old man doing it. And then, of course, part 7, he gets his head cut off, but then that was ruined by resurrection. But you see that bit of dialogue does make a lot of sense when you think about it when it comes to slasher films, especially since long-term slasher film fans talking about it. But all the elements of this film make Monster Squad an excellent film, and it's kind of fitting that I bookend this video with starting with the Universal horror, ending with a film that's a loving tribute to the Universal horror films. And I'll say, if you do love the Universal horror films, you've never seen Monster Squad, you don't know what you're missing. It's excellent. I mean, you even got that Monster Squad theme song. And then, of course, sending for the army guys and they show up afterwards. That's a perfect way to end the film. That's a light spoiler, though. And then how they have to deal with all the monsters. There's that. And then, of course, that is my top 10. For those of you who want me to recap, part 1 is a cheat with Whales, Frankenstein Duology, Blob 88, Halloween 78, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, Dawn of the Dead, the original, Alien, Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, Tremors, the original King Kong, and the Monster Squad. And it goes without saying that each and every one of these films on here does come with my recommendation. If you're not the biggest fan of them, no worry, to each their own. But they come with my recommendation. And John, thank you for requesting this video. And can't wait to see what you're going to request next, my buddy. And I hope you all enjoyed this. And till next time, everybody.